I don't see that she's joined us yet.
Okay, you want to wait a minute?
Maybe just a minute.
Well, we could get the consent agenda done, couldn't we?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Can we do them all at once, or do we need to do it one at a time?
You can do it all at once unless someone wants to pull one off for separate consideration.
Okay. Do I have a motion to accept?
I'll move to approve.
Second. Made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Let me know when you see her come on. Nothing yet?
No, I suppose we can get started. The next item, I do have a presentation, so that'll buy us a little bit of time.
Let's go with the presentation on Kansas County to review recommendations on changes of tax abatement policy. Go ahead.
All righty. Let's see. Can y'all see that?
Nope. No.
Not yet.
All right, hold on just a second. Let me get it pulled up. Oh, here we go. All right, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay. First, just wanted to start out with a little bit of background. This last month at one of our county commissioner court meetings, we had a request by a commissioner to consider amending our guidelines and criteria for tax abatement. And what they were looking for is a 30-day public notice requirement in order to help facilitate transparency. So this item was on the commissioner's court meeting. The topic was referred to the LGC to come back to the court with a recommendation, and specifically the motion indicated that that would be request was for February. The commissioners also requested that we look at review our target industries and have a recommendation on that topic as well. And in this presentation, I'm going to kind of give you a little background of where we are and on this topic in general. As a result of that particular request, we did do an initial review of the statute and took a look at the county guidelines and criteria, but specifically the statute already requires a 30-day notice, and actually there's more than 30 days that's required, and I'm going to go through that statute very quickly in a moment in order to kind of show that process, and it is filled already by state statute with a lot of transparency requirements. I was able to locate a county tax abatement guidelines and criteria. It was originally adopted in 2013. It may have been revisited in 2016, but it's substantially the same guidelines. Now, actually, the situation that we're in as far as the county goes is that those guidelines and criteria are really no longer effective because they're only in effect for 2 years from adoption. And then it's re-ratified every 2 years. And for any kind of change, it requires a 3/4 vote. I did contact the other taxing entities. Of course, there's no ordinances in place right now because no tax abatement has been done. So no reinvestment zone, which is the area that you're giving tax abatement to, has been established in the community. And I'm still checking on the guidelines and criteria right now, but it doesn't look like anyone has anything on file. Some of the research shows that possibly the city adopted the same guidelines and criteria at the time that the county did, but we haven't found that record yet. So as far as applicability, the tax abatement code applies to cities, counties, and special districts. I will have to say, I've done a number in my career of tax abatement agreements and creating reinvestment zones and guidelines, but I don't have any experience as it relates to special districts. Special districts are listed as eligible, but the knowledge base on that's pretty limited. In order to change the guidelines and criteria, we would be required to hold a public hearing, and that's for adoption, amendment, repeal, or reauthorizing. And also, the other thing that's important to note is that the guidelines and criteria must be published on the any entity's website that's participating. And I just kind of wanted to talk real quick about tax abatement since the community hasn't done that in the past. It is a long process. As I mentioned before, there are a number of transparency issues that are built into the statute, a lot of notification and public input. It starts out with adopting guidelines and criteria, which requires a public hearing. Then you go in and you establish a reinvestment zone, which is effectively, a geographic area in which you're contemplating doing the abatement. In order to do a reinvestment zone, you have to put it in 7 days in the newspaper. You have to send a notice to all the other taxing entities. You have to hold a public hearing about designating that zone. Now, that's an area. It's not the abatement itself, but it's the area where you're contemplating doing it. And then interested persons are invited to speak and present evidence whether they believe it's appropriate to have a reinvestment zone in the area that's proposed. And then there's an adoption ordinance or order, depending on which entity is doing it, designating that reinvestment zone. And that area is good for, it expires in 5 years unless renewed in 5-year increments. And then also it's important to note some communities have enterprise zones, and those zones are automatically considered reinvestment zones. The next step is the tax abatement process. And as the commissioner was requesting, the statute requires that there's a 30-day public notice of the meeting at which the abatement would be considered. In that notice, it gives a number of abatement details as far as where it is, what the entity is, some of the terms and conditions. And then the approval of the agreement is done after the public hearing. And there's also notice requirements to all other entities before an agreement is executed.
Hey, Kim.
Yes, sir.
Just to be clear, the 30-day notice.
Froze on me.
The 30-day notice is for each individual agreement, not the policy, correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's when for the specific agreement but for the policy, there is public notice requirements, but for the guidelines and criteria. For the guidelines and criteria, there's not public notice specifically required as far as, the time advance, but you do have to have a public hearing.
Okay.
But you can, do it any way that you want. And you could actually specify that within your guidelines if there was going to be additional notice for amendments and that type of thing. Okay, the other piece of economic development that is in the state code is called Chapter 380, which applies to municipalities, and then also Chapter 381, which applies to counties. And I've kept it really simple, but basically it allows you to offer different types of incentives. Typically, that is in the realm of grants. I did list loans on there because the statute does allow for that. I have the communities don't generally engage as much in the loan activity as they do just core grants. But I did list it because it is in the statute. And that applies both to cities and counties. It's authorized under just under different statutes. And in order to do any type of special grant, it does require that you establish a program in advance, which is done by adoption of guidelines and criterias. So we're really looking at two sets of guidelines and criterias, one for tax abatement, which is a very regimented program and process, and then another for the possibility of other types of incentives. So today, what I'm bringing forth to you is consideration, and we're recommending that you make a request to the Aransas County Partnership Economic Development Corporation to review Chapter 312, become very familiar with the process because it's new to the community, and look at the local tax abatement guidelines and criteria that we either have or want to consider to have, looking at a variety of things, the notice requirements, which has been pointed out as an important part from the county's perspective. And as I mentioned, the county also requested looking at target industries, which is something that we talked about when we were, and that we were going to study when we were creating the LGC and also when we were creating the EDC. Taking a strong look at state law, looking at what other communities are doing from a competitive point of view and how they're structuring things, because there's a number of policy decisions that need to be made as it relates to that. And then just an overall general overview. And then to also look at Chapter 380 and 381 and an associated policy that might be associated with that. And then most importantly, potentially asking them to start the public input process by holding some separate meetings to receive public input for two reasons. First, to educate the public, since this is a new topic for the community, but also to get initial feedback on some potential recommendations that would be brought back to the separate entities. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Kim, how much of this work has already been done in the post-Harvey processes we went through?
We, we spent we probably had over 20 meetings talking about creating the EDC and the LGC. We have not talked about a lot other than that we needed to have the policies, that we needed to go through a public process in order to do this. As I mentioned, we talked about that we needed to work through community values and the target industries that we would want to support and incentivize. And just the need to have these policies. It's in all of our plans that we should move forward and develop these policies. We refrained from doing that until the appropriate entities were set up that could research things appropriately and go through some of the initial public processes. So it was definitely contemplated, but it's been up until this time that we were really prepared to go through that process. And it was very timely that a commissioner brought this issue, forward. So we thought it was, the timing was excellent. I also do know that the Economic Development Corporation has met. They had a strategic planning session, and this was one of the initiatives that they had put on their potential work program.
Just to follow up on what Kevin asked, how much of this, if any, was addressed in the Pearl Point tax abatement by the county and city?
So the Pearl Point, as I recall, did not end up going through the tax abatement process. It was done through a Chapter 381 agreement. And so we hadn't gone through that at the time because it was done through a different method. I would recommend, just generally speaking, that you get your guidelines and criteria and community values in place in advance. The last thing that you want to do is debate those topics in front of a potential prospect. And it's also a signal for all those working on economic development. We know where we're at. We know what we're willing to do. It gives the people who are negotiating with the companies very strict guidelines to go by. So you know that the people that are representing you in getting the information together to be brought forward, that they're sending the right message and the right policies and understand what they have to work with.
All right. Anything else? Nope.
Not for me.
Yeah,
Mayor?
I apologize. I keep dropping off and on. I've heard about 80% of the things, but the only point I want to make, and Kevin, correct me, but I think our agreement with Pearl Point was under 380, under Chapter 380, not 381.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yes, for clarification, I should have clarified that. The cities is under Chapter 380 and the counties is under Chapter 381.
Right.
And as far as the records go, I don't believe that the county or the city or Fulton has has done any tax abatement in the past. And that's why you wouldn't have any ordinances for reinvestment zones or anything.
All right. Okay, this is an action item. Anybody have any recommendations?
Question, Judge, an action item for the LGC or the EDC?
EDC.
Well, let me make a clarification. The action item is for you to request the EDC to do the homework and some initial public input meetings. When a recommendation comes forward, and if a policy is brought forward, then of course you would go through your public meeting processes again with the individual entities. But this is to solidify and get some really good public input like we promised when we were creating the entities initially before drafts are complete. And so the request is to for the asking the EDC to study these matters as outlined and bring forth a recommendation back to the LGC.
I think that would be appropriate. We want to make sure they get all their homework done. And I don't know how much work they've done in this series so far.
Appreciate you bringing that up, because one of the things I did have dialogue with the EDC about this. They think that they are going to need more time than the amount of time that was designated to bring a recommendation back to the Commissioners Court. They had specified they'd like to see something in February. And because this is very detailed and a lot of research has to be done, and we'll have to work with an attorney to make sure that everything's proper and in accordance with state law, they do believe that they're going to need more time than through February, especially with trying to glean public input.
And just a question for Kevin, we're not obligating the city to anything with this matter.
No.
Because if we get to that point, that would have to go to council for discussion.
So it's just a recommendation to do this study?
Yes, all we're asking for you to do is pass it on to the EDC under y'all's existing contract that you have for them to do the work, to do the study and come up with some recommendations. Those recommendations will come to the LGC. You will take a look at it and then pass on your recommendation to the individual entities for their consideration.
Well, I move we do that. Pass it on, get the study done, get it going.
Motion made. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Okay. Any reports, announcements, or just from any of the directors?
Not from me.
No, sir.
Not for me.
No, sir.
All right.
Judge, may I make one announcement or just
Yes.
an update? We have been working closely with the Economic Development Administration on our grant for a workforce development center. They have accepted all of the information that we've presented. It has been passed on to their legal staff, and it is likely by now that it's been forwarded up to Washington for action. So we're just waiting on that, but we're in good shape, and we've passed all the hurdles that we need in order to receive the award.
Very good.
Sounds good. All right, if nothing else, have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye now.
Goodbye.